So the city of Istanbul, before the 15th century, it was known as Constantinople, and before Constantine the Great of 4th century, it was known as Byzantium. So the capital located, we call the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantium Empire. So Hagia Sophia originally constructed as a Christian church in the 15th century, after being captured by the Ottoman Turkish, it was converted into a mosque. So those 4 minarets were added in the 15th century. So originally the whole building has that kind of characteristic triangular shape with the domes cascading down from the largest one on the top to the bottom like a mountain. So you have to imagine without those minarets about its Byzantine look. So there was a Hagia Sophia before the 6th century reconstruction, but it was destroyed during the riot. And Justinian came to power after that civil unrest, reconstructed it in stone. It's like the reconstruction of the Pantheon by Hadrian. The designer of Hagia Sophia, one is a physicist, Isidore of Miletus, and another is a mathematician, Anthemius of Tralles. So they both have advanced knowledge other than architecture, and the construction did require a lot of engineering, mathematical knowledge to sustain a large span interior under a dome. So yeah, you just pointed to the location of Constantinople, or today's Istanbul. Today it's in the European part of Turkey, just overlooking the Dardanelles and controlling the connection between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean Sea. So its location is very important, very strategic. One of the greatest achievements of Hagia Sophia is the unification of a centralized domed type with basilica processional axis. We have been talking about how the axiality was reconciliated with a centralized plan, for example, in St. Vital or in Pantheon, but none of them was so successful as in Hagia Sophia. So here, architecture has a large dome that created a centralized space. Standing in the middle under the dome, you do feel a sense of ascension, ascending to heaven. And that is the beauty of verticality and a centralized plan. However, there is also no ambiguity whatsoever about a axis. Where is the processional axis that is required for the Eucharist of Christianity. So like the St. Vital, the entrance was through a courtyard. So there's a courtyard, which is a atrium courtyard, meaning there are colonnade surrounding the entire periphery of the courtyard. And there are narthex, and here we have double narthex. just like the old St. Peter's had double aisle. So here for significant building, it's doubled. Double narthex, creating a transition from the bright courtyard into the dark, interior. Hagia Sophia also posed a significant engineering challenge, because we know that no matter Pantheon or St. Vital, the supporting structure, Pantheon is a cylinder, has a cylindrical wall. Supporting a dome, easy, no problem. For St. Vital, it's an octagon plan. Supporting a circle, no problem. But here, the plan is square. So how to support a circle, a dome, with a square plan? That is a huge challenge. It's not easy. But here, the symbolic meaning is significant, as well as the spatial experience. So it has to be solved, that problem. The longitudinal axis, like in St. Vital, it starts from the courtyard, the entrance line up, and now there's no ambiguity for the entrance. Everything is located in the center, and then terminates at the apse. So there is no spatial ambiguity, both in terms of its centrality and its axiality. So how that problem is solved? That problem was solved through a structural element known as pendentive, right? So basically, here we have a square plan. And to make transition between the square plan and a circular dome, 4 arches, giant arches, rise from the 4 sides of the square, and then using spherical triangle to fill the space in between those arches, right? So those arches created 4 spots which touch the base of the dome, and then those 4 spots were filled with this spherical triangle. It belonged to a larger dome, but partially cut off to receive the dome located on the top, right? So to help you better understand how to create a pendentive, next time when you go to a supermarket, buy a watermelon and cut the watermelon into half. So you have a half watermelon. Draw at the base at a circle, the cut away side, a square, and then make 4 vertical cut along those 4 sides. And then finally, you make another final horizontal cut just along the top 4th spot, maybe 1 centimeter away from it, a complete structure, right? You might want to leave some space there as well, because the piers had a thickness. Make a horizontal cut and you have a pendentive, right? And you can eat the red part of the watermelon, and the shell, the green shell, is a perfect pendentive structure. You can put a dome on top. You put some pole under, and that watermelon is a pendentive. You have these spherical triangle, right? So Hagia Sophia was supported with those pendentive. On plan, that triangle is not a straight line, it's not flat. It belonged to a bigger sphere, bigger dome. So the spherical triangles, creating the base to receive the dome on top. On the section, so we have here, these are the triangular sphere or spherical triangle. So they make the transition to receive that dome, and that dome produce enormous lateral thrust, tended to push away and collapse the structure. That's a common problem for vault, arch, and dome. So how to counterbalance that? The architect devised an ingenious scheme to counterbalance that lateral thrust. Along the axis from the entrance to the apse, two half dome were created to counterbalance the lateral thrust of the central dome. And those two half dome, obviously, I made a mistake. Let me clear that. Eraser. That is not the spherical triangle. That is the half dome supporting the central dome. Okay. The triangular sphere is here. This part. These are the spherical triangle, right? That is the half dome supporting, counterbalancing that. But obviously, those half dome also exert lateral thrust, and they were counterbalanced at the apse side by three smaller dome, and on the entrance side by two smaller half dome, and then two giant pier. So this very thick pier, these together, is holding it in that direction, right? So basically, the load of the large one were dispersed into secondary dome and then into piers or tertiary domes. What about that direction? That direction, the lateral thrust was counterbalanced by thick piers, just like that part, right? So the counterbalance that lateral thrust. So this section is cut through this direction. So we are looking at the along the axis, and this section is cut this way and looked at in the direction of the apse. All right, so you see those piers protruding from the wall, counterbalancing on the lateral direction. So that pendentive provide one solution to make transition between a square base and a circular roof. There is a second solution called a squinch. And a squinch is a more kind of a obvious way to provide a solution. And that solution is first to make those diagonal beams turn the square into an octagon. And usually that is enough for a small dome. If needed, the octagon could be further a 16-sided polygon. All right, so that's called a squinch. While in European Christian architecture, in Byzantine architecture, as well as Romanesque and Gothic architecture, pendentive was used to make the transition. And in the future Islamic architecture, squinch was more used. Islamic mosque also tended to, raise dome to symbolize paradise under a square plan. And their solution is usually create diagonal kind of bridge to turn the square into octagon. And they very often create those honeycomb-like small vault underneath. And eventually that would become an Islamic special known as muqarnas. And that is something we are going to look at in the future. So right now, you should know there are two solutions to make transition from square plan into circular ceiling. One is use that spherical triangle. Another is use squinch, that is using kind of diagonal bridge to make the transition. The piers, the arches are very, very strong, very thick. They create that circular base to receive the roof. The roof, thanks to the use of those ribs, so that the rest of the roof could be very thin, and windows could be opened at the base of that dome, and thus created an illusion of weightlessness for that heavy ceiling. So they use these ribs first to make the skeleton, and then fill in very light material. In between, at the base, in between those ribs, those windows were opened, creating a circle of light that dematerialized the roof, making the roof as if it was kind of flying away. So the interior is perfectly symmetrical, but the exterior is not. Different way of supporting the dome, right? In one direction, it's using smaller half domes. On the other direction, it is using pier. And the thickness of that pier created a rectangular exterior instead of a square one because of the thickness of the pier. And inside, the space are pretty symmetrical. However, there are also some kind of accidental effect, which might or might not be designed. For example, if you look at the way this gallery and the first floor, the arches do not line up, right? So some of the columns are supported by the arch, and some of them are more or less lined up with the column underneath. So they do not match exactly, and there's no exact coordination layer and the first layer. And besides, if you observe really carefully, you also notice the arch, the intercolumnar distance are also irregular. See, this is bigger than that one, right? This one is smaller, right? Slightly bigger. And this one is lower, and that one is slightly higher. So basically, what I wanted to say is, this is obviously a huge contrast with the Greek temple, right? The Greek temple is so accurate, and Egyptian pyramid so big but so accurate. Greek wouldn't make that kind of arrangement, and they have seemingly exactly the same thing, but they made small, refinements to create those gentle curve, etc. So for Byzantine architecture like Hagia Sophia, that was not a concern. They were not creating that kind of subtlety, They are creating, their major task was how to sustain that huge roof. So we have this kind of irregularity in other aspect, which would be unthinkable for classical Greek temple. They wouldn't make something like that. They would call this a mistake. So also like the Pantheon, you have to pass through a narrow and a dark corridor, the narthex, and to enter the large space to create that wow moment, right? Transiting from under the dome of the sky into the artificial dome, how to make you feel the dome was so great, so big, so unbelievable. Go through some normal architectural space, still monumental, but can be related to the human scale and relatively dark. And then after passing those 2 layers of narthex, you find yourself under such a spacious roof without any column in between yourself and the altar in the apse at the end of the axis. That was a quite a wow moment. Again, spatial contrast. That is very important to dramatize the scale of the engineering achievement, which might be otherwise, passing unnoticed. So at the threshold, that enormous space, now this is the huge space, right? So from the interior, very clearly you see the central dome supported by 4 giant arches, filling the space in between those 4 giant arches are the spherical triangle. And I want you to use the watermelon to create that part, right? Basically, that part. The half dome counterbalance, and that dome was further supported by 3 smaller half domes. So the structural logic is quite clear from the interior. The detail of the dome, originally mosaics and paintings featuring Jesus Christ and other Christian subjects, angels, etc. After the 15th century, they were replaced with the holy words from Quran inscribed in Arabic. Some Byzantine mosaic, but most of them had been replaced. And the dome is certainly also compared to heaven, to paradise. Procopius, the historian of Justinian's court, said, quote, "Whenever one enters this church to pray, his mind is lifted up toward God and exalted, feeling that he cannot be far away. God cannot be far away, but must especially loved to dwell in this place which he has chosen. It created a ceiling so high that seems unreachable, and the image painted there appeared as the actual descending of the divine being. The central dome, 165 feet above floor, very high above. It is suspended above a ring of 40 windows, that, 40 ribs and 40 windows, suggesting that the immaterial dome floats above the light. So with those light, it kind of dematerializes the heaviness of that dome. Of course, it is heavy. It collapsed after construction, and then it was rebuilt with a greater height. The original height was like that, which exerted greater lateral thrust, smaller downward load, while raising the height and thinning the wall of the dome would create a more stable structure. While compare with Pantheon, so this is Pantheon, Hagia Sophia, they are drawn to the same scale. Hagia Sophia's dome is not the largest dome. It was smaller than Pantheon, right? Pantheon's dome diameter is 150 feet, while the span of Hagia Sophia's dome is 98 feet, right? That's 98, that's 150, much smaller. However, Hagia Sophia has the largest columnless spatial span, thanks to not just one dome, but a series of domes. And that distance is 266 feet. That entire columnless spatial span, that is, there's no column in between the entrance and the back of the apse, and that distance exceed Pantheon by more than 100 feet. So it's not the largest dome, but the largest columnless span in the ancient world. From outside, we notice everything is heavy. From interior, it seems so ephemeral and so light a structure. From outside, we notice that there are buttresses kind of supporting the weight of that dome. The Islamic symbol, of course, was added later. So this also, bring back to our the point we made in the Roman architecture, that interior became the focus of the design, right? Unlike Greek architecture, Roman architecture, the interior was the main purpose. And same is here. So interior is the main purpose. Create space. And area was not as neglected as the non-facade elevation in Roman architecture, but still it is mainly to achieve a great interior space. Unlike classical architecture, Hagia Sophia conceals the structure in the walls. The tectonic expression is subdued, while the structural logic for the supporting system is clear, but how they join with one another is hidden behind a two-dimensional screen of surface decoration. And that tectonic aspect was not deliberately expressed. You don't get a good sense of those, horizontality, verticality of those supporting members everything looks as if they were just behind a very thin screen of membrane. And that is a characteristic of Byzantine architecture. That is also a characteristic of future Islamic architecture.